Ladies and gentlemen, the event will now begin. Kelly, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Nash, and welcome to today's webcast, 10 Best Practices for Securing Your Client Data and Your Practice Too. This event is brought to you by Afinety, a Netgain company, and is sponsored by Law.com. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some basic housekeeping items to help you use the webcast console throughout this hour. First, the event is completely interactive. If you'd like, it's possible to tweet or directly post information to your Facebook and LinkedIn pages right from the console without opening a new browser. Just scroll along the bottom of your screen and click on the social networking widget of your choice. If you have a question for one of our speakers, please enter it in the Q&A widget on your console at any point during the hour. We will answer questions during the live Q&A at the end, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. We definitely do encourage you to ask away. If we run out of time and cannot address your questions live, we'll do our best to follow up with you after the event. In addition, there are some other customizable functions to be aware of. Every window you currently see, from the slide window to the Q&A panel, can either be enlarged or collapsed. With that in mind, please feel free to change the look and feel of your console as you'd like. And now for today's topic and the reason you are all here. While securing client data is always a minimum requirement, the combination of recent events, maturing technology, and new best practices make it a good time to reevaluate whether you're doing enough to keep your clients safe. We're pleased to introduce two expert speakers with us today to discuss this important topic. First, we have Bill Sorensen. Bill is a Certified Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Product at Afinety. He has 25 years of experience moving organizations to the cloud and leading businesses to secure environments. He is a national speaker on both cloud computing and cybersecurity to organizations working to align strategies to assist in growth and security. He has tremendous perspective on the role of IT security in today's complex compliance landscape and has participated in over 100 firms moving to the cloud. We also have with us Steve Sapka. Steve is Director of Technology and Infrastructure at Afinety. He is a seasoned technology professional with 20 years of experience in the engineering and development of IT infrastructures and solutions. His experience includes a deep knowledge of virtualization technologies with a specialization in document management systems for law firms and other industries. He provides consulting and guidance to clients on working standards for highly specialized software and hardware systems. Steve holds certifications in AWS architecture as well as document management. So Bill and Steve, thanks so much for being with us here today, and we're really looking forward to this important conversation. To get us started, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Bill.
Thanks so much, Kelly. We really excited to be here, and thanks so much for everyone taking the time to join us. How are you doing today, Steve?
I am awake. How are you?
I'm doing good. Well, let's jump right in. So today's agenda, we want to talk about security as an overview, really take a look at what's changed now. Next, we want to dive into the technology side of things, then look at the human element, and then finally data and how data still is the most important thing around security, and how you protect that continues to be a real strong focus. At the end, we'll answer questions, so just as Kelly had said, please feel free to submit them, and we'll get to them. Well, let's get started with this question of why address security now. If we look at the media, we see that there's constant pressure on all of our organizations around security. We see hacking increase with remote workers now really across the country, across the world. There's a dramatic increase in exposure. So how are we going to handle that exposure? We also see that, even the important level has gotten to be heightened enough so that New York even says they're requiring now cybersecurity CLEs. Steve, as you think about this expanded role of security, especially as we see people working from home, how do you kind of describe that?
Yeah, the way I think about this and the way I describe it is you're starting to think about security now, and you think about your office, your physical office as a castle. And now what we're really talking about is expanding your castle walls from your on-premise office to your end users' homes. As many businesses are having more remote workers than they had ever planned for in the past. So, you now really do need to start thinking about, how do we do this? How do we expand these castle walls to the home?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's take a first look at here. Number one is really reevaluating your security and starting with this idea that policies and procedures in this aspect are really important. Security is now a really living, breathing thing that needs to be evaluated continually. And really, things like bring your own device, remote worker policies, onboarding and offboarding clients, those things now take on a different meaning as both, we've had remote workers now for many, many months. And then now we're seeing organizations start to bring people back into the firm. And so it's a great time, if you've not taken a look at those policies and procedures, to bring those up, take a look, update them, and then do training around these as well. We're sharing, webcams from home. We're doing a dramatic amount of things here with these remote workers. I know, Steve, as you think about this, and this fits into that analogy of expanding those castle walls now are at home, at everybody's home. You want to talk about that a little bit?
That's right. So, when you start thinking about this and really how you need to reevaluate your own security. So when you start thinking about, you now need to extend the castle wall to your end users' homes, you as a business now need to start thinking about, how is the user's home security part of your business policies and procedures? Because you may be extending a VPN client on a user's you may put a VPN client on a user's laptop and allow that user to VPN into your office. Well, you need to start thinking about things like, what about my end users or my home users' Wi-Fi security? Have you thought about your home users' Wi-Fi network? Most home users are using Wi-Fi in some way, shape, or form. When's the last time that Wi-Fi access point or the router has had its firmware updated? If the firmware on that router or that device is not updated, you're at risk. And if your home users are at risk and you've extended the castle wall out to their houses because they're on a VPN and their Wi-Fi is wide open, well, you're extending and you're now making your network, putting your network at risk. So you need to add the concept of dealing with these home users as part of your security policies.
Exactly. And I think that, a key piece here is you've got to adjust for these things that you never can ultimately control fully. And so policies and procedures help in this aspect, but there's continually more and more things to address. Well, let's jump into kind of this first section around technology as we look at security best practices. So first, we're going to talk about remote workspaces. And so these are really cloud desktops that are provided a number of different ways, but the goal here is to encapsulate all of a user's activity, their applications, their data in one significantly centralized and strong vault. And so as we go forward here, we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the goal is really protection of the environment and then isolation from, literally the bad guys here. And so this really provides this strong, controlled environment. We see this coming out of both Amazon AWS and Microsoft Azure as kind of the two core tenets for this. I know we had a good example of one of these from a client literally just a couple of years back, Steve, where They had been working in a coffee shop, got up to go to the restroom. Their laptop got stolen, and immediately called and said, this is this huge problem. In reality, we were able to make sure that no one was connected to their environment in this remote workspace, and they were able to, have comfort in nothing was exposed, nothing was stolen. Do you want to talk a little bit about how this works, Steve, and really, that separation from the local world to this remote workspace?
That's right. You're as you're saying, you're isolating the damage that's caused from having some device out there, in the open. Really, I'll go back to the castle and the castle wall analogy. What we're really discussing here is, implementing a solution such as a castle keep. You have your keep, which is your really strong part of your castle. Like right now, that would be your server room or your server closet. That's your keep. You generally keep the door locked. You may have fire suppression systems. People can't get into the room. And what we're talking about now is keeping your data inside of that keep, keeping your network secure and controlling access to that data so that the data never leaves your network. Your data never travels over a VPN to a laptop that can be stolen by keeping it within the keep. So something like for remote workers, something like a workspace really helps with that concept because you're never bringing data down to a local machine. The data stays under your complete control and is separate from any local PCs at all times. So, important point.
Yeah, it's a great solution. The other thing is this provides this really work desktop that's accessible from anywhere at any time, and then offers dramatic performance improvements too. Well, let's move on to the next item, physical security. And this has been less and less of a important piece as people have moved things to the cloud. The cloud is such a huge upgrade here that the need to own your own physical infrastructure really has gone away. This transfers this really requirement both financially and a significant amount of risk gets transferred with this as well to really move that physical environment into the cloud. We're seeing the dramatic amount of security, and we'll talk about the cost of security or value of security in the cloud in a little bit. But the idea that you could physically secure something better in your office compared to having it secured in these extremely large, dramatically protected data centers is just, such a big gap that we don't see people wanting this physical infrastructure so much anymore. So not owning it here is key. Steve, you want to talk a little bit about how we've seen with COVID-19 and the last significant number of months, the impact on office buildings even?
Sure. Going back to the let's say your server room, right? With COVID-19 right now, your physical building may be fairly empty. You may be running a reduced staff. There may be less people in the building than would normally be throughout all hours of the day. So many offices, we hear people say, the office is completely empty. So you don't really know who's in, who's out of your office at any given time. When you talk about physical security, physical infrastructure, what we're talking about here is, do you have the ability to manage the security versus the tons of security staff who are on the cusp of all new security incidents? They're keeping up on them, day in and day out, where you're spending time, trying to focus on, hey, I have a troubleshooting issue I have to deal with. There are teams of security experts in the cloud computing, and really, you can just to not compete with the number of people that are thinking about your security and securing your data. There's cameras, there's fire suppression systems, and they're all state of the art. So you have a real plus when you're thinking about the cloud security.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key here is let's just stop worrying about this physical security piece and just don't own it. There's just no value in owning the technology today. Leave that problem to Amazon. Well, let's go on and since you brought up cloud security, that ties in exactly to our next slide. Here we really are looking at that same extension of don't own the infrastructure, leverage the cloud, and really what does that mean? And I want to touch on just a little bit this idea of public cloud versus private cloud. When we talk about the public cloud, it's really the Amazons of the world, the Microsoft Azures of the world, and in that environment, you're carved out this extremely dedicated area that's all yours. You don't get impacted by somebody down the hall. Kind of the example we use periodically is it's kind of like being in an apartment building versus being in your own house. People who either host their own things or host with a private cloud provider end up in an apartment building where somebody on a lower floor may start a fire. Your unit's going to get impacted. And we see that happen time and time again with ransomware attacks and other things. Now, with the Amazon solution, you really get this carved out house all to yourself. Somebody down the hall, down the road, anything like that can do anything they want, and that never impacts you. So you get dramatic amount more security, you get better performance, and really you get this isolation that historically you could never, ever afford. Steve, you want to talk a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah, I mean it's a great analogy in the sense, public cloud is really a dedicated environment, and it is confusing for people because they're often told, oh no, your stuff is not a dedicated environment. Well, it's dedicated in the sense that you get something called a VPC, a virtual private cloud, and it's dedicated to you. It's your accounts. No other accounts share data. You're not sharing hard drives amongst other people. So, the public cloud scenario allows you to do things such as leveraging the security of a multi-billion-dollar company, which really you cannot compete with them when it comes to managing the security, and so you get your own piece of the pie to do what you want with your piece of the pie.
Exactly. Yeah, and we've seen time and time again where that protection really isolates organizations and really helps them do their own thing without the impact of those other people in the apartment building. So let's go on and look at this next section. This is a key area. People are really the last defense mechanism for organizations and firms. I want to talk first about this idea of security first mindset. Historically, we used to think that security, cybersecurity, those things, that was all the IT department. They put up firewalls, they do things like that to help stop bad guys really from coming in. I think the change over the last number of years have been that all those things are in place and they're really, really valuable and really, really strong. But the hacker community has pivoted, and we've seen such a dramatic increase on pressure on individuals. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what we really want here is the whole company is involved in security now. If you're at the front desk and a copy repairman comes in, you don't know them, they want to get into your organization, look at the electronic equipment, they look right, maybe they've got a work order, you still don't know them. it's always valid to, reach out, make sure they're scheduled, make sure, they're supposed to be there. We've seen so many times where situations happened where somebody came in, whether it was the phone system support folks or the copy support folks, and they weren't really who they said they were, and dramatically moved data out. So we want people to be involved in this. I think as you look at this in relation to ransomware, Steve, give maybe an example or talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, this is such an interesting point for me. I could absolutely talk forever on this point. A security-first mindset and the terms that you see up on the slide. Question everything. It's not just IT's problem. I want to emphasize this. You need to think differently. You need to think differently about how you thought about security in the past. You cannot go to your IT person and expect your IT person to have answers for all problems related to security. Security, and you'll see this in the next few slides, things change now so quickly. We don't have 0-day exploits. We don't have 0-hour exploits. We now have 0-minute exploits. You may not know what those mean, but you can look those terms up. So everybody inside your business needs to think about security. It is no longer just take a 5-minute training class and I'm good. No, you need to think about it day in and day out, because ransomware, once it gets into your network, is a nightmare. Once you've lost control of all of your data, it is not a fun process to try to recover your data. So you really want to be ahead of the curve and understand how your users can block ransomware attacks, because it's generally your users that allow the ransomware into the office in the first place, not intentionally, unintentionally. But everybody in the firm needs to embrace a security-first culture. It is a different mindset than people had in the past. Everybody needs to think about security now, especially with the remote work that many people are doing with COVID, because now you're dealing with computer systems that are outside of control of the IT. Again, extending those castle walls. So this needs to be part of the culture of your firm going forward. Bill?
I think the adoption of the security-first mindset isn't just related to email, which we'll talk about next, or those kinds of things. But it's this idea, even at home, as people are working from their home offices, they get different interruptions, different things there. So it's important to think about, did requests come from who you think they did it? So let's go on to training, because that's a key piece here is with this ever-changing world of security, with different kinds of attacks, with different kinds of ways in, our employees are really this last defense for us. So let's build them up with good, solid training. Training is really a journey. It's not an annual event. And making it part of their normal process is something we talk about a lot, Steve. We leverage some outside vendors for that, and our firms, our organizations really build up their training for defense against cybersecurity over time. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe KnowBe4 here as an example of that training?
Sure. So like when you're talking about training, a common misconception that I see when we are talking with our own customers is that people think that training is a class and they're done. And it's not. Training is a journey. It absolutely is a journey. It is not an annual event. Everyone knows that they should be doing some security awareness training, but they're not taking it as seriously as they need to. And you do need to use a tool like KnowBe4, which is really an ongoing responsive training program. It is a program designed around training for your specific firm. If you have HIPAA regulations you have to deal with, that's fine. So when you use a training program, you get baselines of your firm. You have an understanding of how your firm's is susceptible to phishing attack. You can then craft your training program for your users so that you can help them identify the phishing emails. KnowBe4 is a wonderful platform. It's what we use. You can even take those phishing emails for those that click on it, and it helps them identify what was the phishing portion of the email. And at the same time, it will help people understand how they are really being socially engineered when you have the bad guys attacking employees and trying to use fear by crafting an email designed to look like it's from a managing partner, requesting them to circumvent the normal processes and procedures and just do something that the managing partner didn't actually ask them to do. So really, everybody through the firm needs training, from the managing partner, down to office services, so that everyone understands, what it looks like in today's world, especially when it comes to things like phishing and ransomware. And, you don't want to get hit with it. You want to acknowledge, oh, hey, that's a bad email, and be done with it.
Exactly. Well, let's move that forward a little bit and talk about email security and really this concept that, the tools we have capture some of this, right? They look at the emails, and here's where Microsoft Office 365 has done a good job of starting to grab those, pull those out that are obviously ransomware attempts, phishing attempt emails. But as this has changed over the years, we used to get dramatic volumes of phishing emails that were obvious, and in those situations, it wasn't that hard to determine what was real and what was fake. Now, the fakes look exactly like the real ones. And I like to talk about, well, how does this work today? A little bit around security here and attempts to deliver ransomware or malware or really get you to do something you shouldn't. We used to think about it as it was an individual player who was doing this. It's the teenager in the basement, it's a group of them, that type of thing. That's all gone. Over the last 10 years or so, it's morphed into dramatically large organizations. These organizations buy domain names that are similar to yours. They look and identify and build out org charts of your organization. And then they watch. And they've got a significant number of people that watch your social media accounts. Periodically send emails to see if they get a bounce back that says you're out of office. And then they look for an opportunity to really deliver dramatically well done emails to ask people to do things. One example, Steve, that I really, hit home for me a couple years ago was an invoice payment to a foreign organization that got submitted and transmitted. Somebody had looked and found an invoice copy for an actual vendor that this firm was paying, and then created a new invoice from that, submitted that to the organization, and then leveraged their knowledge of the managing partner to send an email in and say, hey, why hasn't this been paid? The internal group wanted to be responsive and quickly, kind of escalated, and they paid that invoice. That invoice was over $300,000. That money left the firm, never came back. And it was just the situation where a process wasn't followed internally because a request was made by somebody leading that organization. When we think about emails and email security here, it really leverages this human behavior. I think as we look at this, Steve, this is really tough. This is something that it goes to that, back to that mindset here of how do we keep people safe from these things? What are your thoughts?
You just hear all the time of people, falling for the, hey, I need you to order X thousands of dollars of gift cards for customers and send them off, and then by the time they're already gone, so I didn't send that. So here's some really good, just good food for thought that you really should think about when it comes to email security and relying more on people than just electronic tools. Electronic tools know zeros and ones. Email right now is really the gateway to everything about you, because your email address is generally the de facto logon to much of everything that you're going to use out in the world. So you need to bring the human behavior into process and start thinking about how your users are dealing with things like these fake emails on the screen. You have a real one and a fake one. And you need to add policies and procedures to mitigate that risk before you get attacked. So a really, really simple example, but people don't do it, is when you get emails, let's use the ones that are on the screen here as an example, where the emails look almost the same. You just make it a policy that a person needs to call a person requesting a cash, this cash payout or a payout. They have to make a phone call and confirm verbally that email is a legitimate email. You just make that part of a policy and procedure, not well, it should be done. No, it must be done. And it's tough because people are not happy with change, but you need to think about change. These fake emails are becoming harder and harder to spot. So, there's other products out there that can help secure, and we'll talk about those a little bit here in a little with MFA, but the person or the human behavior, you need to think about that. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, definitely. I think a key piece here is getting tools in play that help you, but email's used really as your identity. And so you've got to be able to protect that identity. So let's go on and talk about these two specific things that we see as some of the most important things to implement and to protect your firm and your individuals. One is multi-factor authentication, and the second is really password managers. MFA is really that user ID and password plus one other method. And there's been a variety of implementations. We really like the phone application as the other method today. Everyone has phones. The applications work really well. You get a little phone notification that someone's trying to log in, and you can say yes or no to that, and quickly gets you logged in. The belief is that without MFA, you're dramatically more at risk for exposure. And we've seen this historically. The FBI says the best thing to do is use MFA everywhere, really in your personal life, in your work life. Many times we're using that user ID and password or at least that user ID, for your external accounts that relate to your organization. This is this one thing, Steve, we talk about over and over and over again, is passwords need to be different. And I'm just going to interject that here before I let you comment. Passwords need to be different. They need to be different on your work account. They need to be different in your home account. They need to be different everywhere. And this is really hard. It's not simple to always have a different password. Today we've got dozens and dozens of these accounts. And so there's good methods to help with that. And Steve, I'm going to have you just talk about that for a little bit around that password manager.
Absolutely. So let me clarify some very specific things for everyone. What Bill and I are discussing here is a true MFA solution, not a solution where Some company says they're going to send you a text message. Research that on your own. You will see that just plain text messaging is not a real MFA solution. A real MFA solution, something like Duo, a real MFA solution is the easiest, least intrusive protection that you can offer your staff, and I love them. I mean, you will never be able to stop a human being from mistakenly typing in their username and password to some fake website that somebody somehow got them to go to. So they may give up their email address, they may give up their password, but if they're using MFA, the bad guys cannot get into their mailbox and start causing havoc amongst the rest of your staff, because then the bad guys, if they get into the mailbox, they're sending out emails as if it was that user. So if somebody replies in an email, hey, did you really mean to say that? The bad guy goes, oh yeah, I did. So MFA is your strongest protection. Now, a corporate password manager though, something like LastPass, 1Password, RoboForm, they all offer corporate versions. This allows you as the company to manage your end users and their ability to store passwords, use random passwords. Those password managers generate random passwords and will plug them into the websites that your users visit. They're cross-platform compatible. They'll work on Windows, Macs, iPhones, Androids. So you can link your passwords and they can be protected themselves with MFA. So somebody can't get into the password manager without MFA. And what's wonderful about password managers is you don't have to remember passwords. You just have crazy long random passwords that you can store on websites and let the password manager deal with it. Now, an interesting point, you'll notice on the slide here, we have a link to Have I Been Owned? Now, I recommend you check that site out. It is a legitimate site, and what they've done is they've aggregated thousands, well, not thousands, millions upon millions of emails and email password combinations that have been exploited by companies like, if you've ever logged into an Adobe account, Adobe lost all of their users and passwords to a hack a couple of years ago. You may realize or not realize that passwords that you use consistently are in the open, and you should be changing them. That site is a site that lets you know if your password or your account has been hacked in the past.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, Steve, and it's important to be able to do this. The other thing is, as an organization, if somebody leaves, we now have accounts with web applications, a variety of different things, and by having a corporate password manager, you can quickly and easily expire all those access accounts to those outside services. So that's another plus. But let's move on to data. Data is what we ultimately are trying to protect here. And there's a couple pieces that are key to that. The first one's really a basic key, but something we want to talk about. Encryption and encryption at rest. It's automatic. It's built into the cloud solutions today. It's something set and forget. And really, as you're looking at your exposures or that concern around, well, what if my data got exposed on a laptop or something? By having all that encryption in place, encryption at rest and encryption in transit, you've got a significant better chance that somebody can't get that data. As we look at cloud desktops, we see a dramatic move to really keeping data, our clients' information, off our laptops and only hosting it in that cloud desktop environment. So that's a huge plus. And then as we look at cloud providers and encryption there, your ability to have that encryption and not have it really breakable by anyone is a key piece. Steve, you want to touch on this before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, really, the primary focus here that we're talking about really is encryption at rest, and that's the primary topic. And moving your data to the cloud is really the best way to go for the ease of implementing encryption of your data. You know, we can talk about if you have legacy systems such as 2008 servers or 2008 R2 servers. You know, your data is now on a server that technically is no longer getting security updates. You may not be able to implement some of the more modern forms of encryption. And when you're talking about the cloud encryption, you're really talking about encryption and automation kind of living hand in hand. You start to get access to things that you may not have easy access to when you're managing everything internally on premise, where you're not rotating your keys in an automated fashion, so you don't have to think about, oh, I have been using the same encryption key for the last 10 years. So, encryption, easy thing to do to put it in the cloud, encrypt it. All the providers really offer that, and it's kind of the de facto standard now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's move on to one of the key pieces here for organizations. We've kept it as 10, and that's the concept of least access approach to data security. And what we mean here is the ability and the need to control who inside your firm has access to what data. There's many reasons for this. The big key piece is having people exposed to only the data they need to within the organization. Then should they have an issue, that limits the scope of the issue for the firm. And this includes partners. You don't want access to information you really don't need to use. You don't want that increased level of risk. So as we look at this and we see other industries dramatically implement this by really separating and segregating everyone. The goal, again, is to limit the exposure to the firm from one individual. We see it both for insider threat as well as external threat. And this can be files and folders. This can be within applications. And it's a key important piece of trying to control the exposure of that data. So in an example, in a case you're working on, how many people need access to that case? Obviously, the whole firm doesn't, but which individuals? By making that part of your normal process to set those controls in place, you've got a really, really good method to deter an impact from an outside organization. Steve, do you want to give a little bit of the ransomware impact in relation to this as well?
Well, I want to give more about a story, but I'll talk a little bit about the ransomware too. So kind of wrapping up this least access approach and kind of bringing this back together with all the things that we've been talking about today. For those of you that have actually traveled to England, if you've ever been to the Tower of London, it's a great analogy here. At the Tower of London, you have your outer castle walls. Those are the walls that I'm talking about, maybe extending out to your users' homes that you have to think about now. You have your inner castle walls. That's the actual physical office that you have. You have your keep. That's your server room. And what we're talking about now are really sections within the keep. You're not giving access to the entire keep for everybody. You're really giving access to only the information that people need, the least access approach. You slow and stop ransomware by thinking about how you want to secure users' data. Only give people access to the data that they need. That way, if they are impacted by ransomware, generally the ransomware agent, whatever you want to call it, will only be able to destroy the data that person has access to. So if they don't need to access everything within the network, lock it down. I know it is a different way of thinking than in the past when you say, everyone gets access to everything. So it's a different way of thinking about this. And I just use the Tower of London as a good analogy because you can kind of picture everything and figure out, where does my data go in this view? Back to you, Bill.
You bet. Yeah, you bet. I think the The other thing to point out is, as we've looked over these 10, many of the other items are implemented either through a partner or tools. This one isn't. This one is on the firm to implement, and so we want to make sure that you understand really the importance around that. So let's talk about, how do you get started? You already have many of these things in place. A key piece here is take an inventory of your security gaps, identify what those are, really focus on prioritizing your exposures, trying to get control of the most complicated or risk-prone areas, and then get those prioritized and get those done. Many of these are straightforward. It's important to know that these risks and this risk management role is on you. Partners help. Partner within the industry that knows your industry is key here, but it's also important to just embrace that idea that risk management is a living part of any organization and taking it seriously, especially as we've seen with the work at home requirement over the last 9 months. The world has changed. Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about training an MFA?
Sure. You have 3 things that I would like to really kind of end with here and discuss. And realize that if there's anything that you're going to take away from this webinar, these are the 3 things that I think are really the most important. First, you need to be consistent with training to lessen the insecure footprint, really, of humans. We're the ones that are out there. We click on things that we don't mean to click on. You need to get that training going, the security and awareness training, and you need to be consistent. It is not a one-time thing. You have to do it over and over. The security vulnerabilities, the ransomware, whatever's out there today is not the same that's going to be out there tomorrow. So you need to understand what you're looking at day in and day out. Second, you need to get MFA installed and implemented. That will stop most bad Office 365 Exchange emails that come in that get people to click on things and go somewhere and type in their usernames and passwords. It'll stop the break-in in its tracks. It won't stop the fact that somebody may have given up their username and password, but it will stop the ability of the bad guys to get into your network. And email is just the beginning. You really can be implementing this for many different programs. There's ways to link third-party sites that your firm is using to include MFA, and they can use your corporate MFA. And last but not least, you need to think about your castle, and you need to think about those walls and how you need to extend them to your remote workers now. If you're allowing people to set up VPNs on a laptop and go home and access your corporate network over that VPN, if your end user is at home on an insecure Wi-Fi access point, you don't know that the information that is going back and forth over the VPN, which may be encrypted, isn't being seen in another form over something like an insecure Wi-Fi link. You don't know what's going on with the end users on their home system. So you need to think about that, and you need to think about how your castle is being constructed in today's world. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think that most importantly, 8 out of 10 of these best practices, as I had said, can be implemented through the right partner and really require a minimal effort on your part. You can't transfer responsibility for everything, but you can sure get help from key people within your industry. Well, Kelly, I think that's the end of the slides here. I see that there are some questions that have come in. We've got a little bit of time left. Let's get to those questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bill, and thank you, Steve. This has been a great conversation. Yes, in the final minutes we have here, let's go ahead and answer the questions that we've gotten from the audience. And now is just a great time to remind everyone, if you do have a question for Bill or Steve, please go ahead and enter it in the Q&A widget on your console. We will get through as many as we possibly can. So the first question we have here is, we have MFA for our AWS login. Should we do it for Office 365 as well? And can that be done?
Steve, why don't you take this one?
Yes, that absolutely can be done, and yes, you absolutely should do it.
Okay, great. Another question, can you name some of those password managers again?
Sure. I think it was, we used LastPass. Steve, you had two more on that one.
Yeah, LastPass, RoboForm, and the last but not least was 1Password. All three of those offer corporate password managers. The reason I say corporate password managers, this way you can, in essence, pre-populate your end users or manage how their passwords are for your corporate programs or websites. And if the user leaves, you now have the ability to maintain those passwords or change them, and you know what passwords they were using. So there's some real benefits to actually implementing corporate password managers.
You bet.
Great, thanks, Steve. Someone else would like to know if you can explain a little bit what KNOW4 is.
Sure. KNOW4, K-N-O-W-B-E, the number 4, is a training provider really across the world around cybersecurity and phishing. The implementation usually is training packages for your firm, as well as then weekly or monthly phishing, so emails that go out that look real, that aren't, for your users. And that process dramatically improves the understanding of what these phishing attacks are and builds up a defense against them.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. Here's another great question. If you do move to the cloud, what does a legal-focused IT managed services firm bring to the table versus a generalist IT managed services firm?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we've got a specific focus at Afinety and Netgain, and so really deliver into those, into the legal industry, for example. What we really see is the understanding of what goes on in the firm, the understanding of the applications, the ability to help with application updates, key configurations and testing, and really this focus on knowing how you run your firm. Where a general IT organization, they're interested in, is the equipment up and running? Can you get connected to it? And then really hands off on the application side. I don't know anything about the applications, that's on you. So we really see how firms take advantage of that vertical specific partner. And then that partner is also seeing other firms and what those firms are doing. They're plugged into the industry, so they're looking forward at what's coming next. How do we help our clients with that? So it's a dramatic improvement in the delivery of the service that gets built in by having somebody who's focused on legal.
All right, great. The next question here is related to AWS Workspace, MFA, and public Wi-Fi. What is the actual danger to someone actually accessing firm data?
Steve, do you want to take that?
Sure. So the danger of them accessing firm data is really zero, in the sense that, let's talk about it from this perspective. We're talking specifically about AWS Workspaces. So let's think about how the AWS Workspace client works. You have an encrypted authentication session followed by an encrypted streaming session that is only sending encrypted pixels back and forth between the local client, let's just call that somebody sitting in a hotel room on public Wi-Fi that doesn't have any encryption, and the AWS workspace, which exists in AWS. So you don't have that danger of someone accessing the firm data because the communication is encrypted.
Great, thanks, Steve. We have a few more questions to work through. The next one being, it's a really two-part question. Can our cloud provider access our data in the cloud, and do we still own our own data?
Sure, I can address that. With the encryption in place, you really own and have access to those, what they would call encryption keys, and nobody else does. So that encrypted data stays encrypted. The second piece, do you still own your data? You always do with public cloud providers. It's in your agreements. There's great examples through time where that's been confirmed. So you always own that data.
All right, great. Another question here. How can a public cloud be more secure than our on-prem server?
Steve, you want to answer that?
Sure. I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were describing in some of the slides earlier, where when you have your public cloud system, you have multiple security teams looking at that server. Depending upon how you design your public cloud solution as well, you can leverage multiple cloud services. And so what's nice about these cloud services, and some of them may be managed directly by AWS or Azure, where you're leveraging services that if you were to purchase for your office, you're spending six figures, versus when you leverage them in the public cloud, you're paying for them as a monthly service. So they're already pre-built in, pre-rolled into various managed services within the public cloud. So in essence, you have more eyes on security than you do with an on-prem system. Trying to roll that into a simple answer.
All right, perfect. So we have time for one final question here in the last few minutes, and that is, if a VPN is using a computer that is using a hardwire link to internet, can that be easily hacked as opposed to Wi-Fi?
Do you mind if I take that, Bill?
No, you can, sure.
Okay. So when you think about the concepts that I was discussing earlier about Wi-Fi, the answer to your question is yes and no. But understand, if you have an insecure Wi-Fi access point, one that the firmware hasn't been updated in X number of years and is vulnerable to some of the Wi-Fi hacks that are out there right now, somebody could break into your Wi-Fi access point and control the Wi-Fi access point and use that as a diving board or a ledge or a jump off to get into your network and start doing things inside your network. So they could then leverage the ability to start figuring out how to break into that hardwired link if there is Wi-Fi connected to the same network that hardwired link is on. So you do need to make Wi-Fi part of that castle wall analogy. That cannot be Trader's Gate, if you understand what I mean, in the London Tower scenario.
All right, excellent. Well, on that note, we have reached the top of the hour. Thanks for all the questions that have come in. We appreciate the participation. And again, Bill and Steve, thanks so much for your time today. Thank you also to Law.com for making this event possible. And for our audience, if you missed any part of the presentation or would simply like to view it again, it will be archived shortly at law.com/webcast. And while you're on that page, also feel free to explore other upcoming and on-demand presentations. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe.